dry season. She has this amazing garden, and she was just recently did a stint out in 21 acres for about a year or so. But I remember she came here and brought me a little bowl full of beans, and they were like Jacqueline beanstalk beans. I mean, they were just amazing color. They were pink and purple. I mean, literally pink and purple, like Flintstone vitamin pink and purple. Seriously. And they were so cool. And they were fresh shelling beans. There's like the dried beans and then fresh shelling beans, which also have to be cooked for a longer period of time, but not like when we think of fresh shelling beans, like this could be a fresh shell bean if I harvested it. It still needs to be cooked, but peas could be fresh shell beans, right? But we can eat those raw or require those cooking time. But yeah, there's pink and purple colors, and unfortunately, as you cook them, those colors fade and wash out. Just like you'll see with the color on these ones that are coming around, like the little maroon stripes that are on there. Those are cranberry beans. Those ones, again, will get kind of washed out. I thought we used cranberry beans for, did we make minestrone with them? Oh, we used canned beans. These ones I love. They're lovely. I love the color. It's like a lovely celadon green. They're called flageolet, and they're a French bean. They're very delicate and buttery. There's a great site that I love to go to for heirloom varietals that have, just for informative in general, it's called Rancho Gordo. And Rancho Gordo has these, it has these fantastic varietals like Painted Yellow Lady and, Fire Tongue and just, really cool varietals of heirlooms that are, have all these descriptors, almost like the wine shelf, talkers that you see when you go to buy wine. It has ripe, berry, cherry. Well, this website actually has a lot of those descriptors for the beans as well, so it's kind of interesting to take a look at that and order some of those beans. The other thing that I like, I was listening to a podcast, I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking to the guy who owns this place, and he was talking about some of his varietals, and he also has like a little video of how to cook beans in a traditional bean pot, and he talks about not throwing out the water, how we've been told to rinse up, weigh the beans after they've been cooked and things like that, and that's where all the flavor is, and it's a misconception that people think that the water is what contains the things that make us gassy, and that's not true either. But he also talked about a new product that he's trying to bring to the United States, and I don't know if any of you have had this, but huitlacoche. Any of you have had huitlacoche? It's a corn fungus or corn smut. It's actually a corn blight, and if you look at it, it's not very appealing. It looks like the ear of corn, and then it looks like it has like Elephant Man kind of purple. Have you seen it? And it's a corn mushroom, or corn fungus, and it's also called corn truffle. It's delicious. If you haven't ever traveled throughout Mexico, any of you, you get these like quesadilla with this lovely Oaxacan cheese and sautéed huitlacoche. It's delicious. Corn truffle, fantastic. But he's trying to segregate areas of corn just for that, and hopefully import them. Now you can only get them in a can. What else do we have? Fava beans. So these are dried fava beans. When we as chefs, start getting into these cold snaps and are, tired of eating, roots and potatoes and orange and yellow and brown vegetables all winter long. In the springtime, we start getting these little sprouts of green things that come up. And one of the first ones that come up besides our green beans are fava beans. And fava beans have actually a long growing. We get them in the spring and they go throughout, towards the end of summer. So they have a long growing season. But they are a very laborious plant or actually bean to prepare. So these ones are dry, so they take even longer. But when you first get them, like when you see them, have you seen the fresh fava beans, any of you, in the grocery store? So they're long, a long bean that has kind of a mottled green coating. It's a fairly thick bean. You split them open, and inside it has a snowy white, bunny, soft, interior. And sitting in this like royal fur has maybe like 5 or 6 of these green beans, light-colored green beans. And then you pull those out, and then you have to blanch them, and then you have to take them out of their skins, and then you have to cook them. So they take a long time. This is what we give to prep cooks. So the dry varietal takes even longer because you have to soak them, and then you have to blanch them, and then you have to still remove the outside paper skins. They have a very earthy, robust flavor, very similar to like a gigantes, like a big white butter bean, but even earthier than that. The dry varietal you'll see commonly used in Middle Eastern cuisine for ful madamas, which is like a ful or ful, or and used as like a hummus. It's quite delicious. But again, it's a pretty intense flavor. Getting into we have pinto beans. These ones come around our common pinto bean. We've already dealt with our split peas. There's a black bean, an organic varietal of a black bean, and these ones will keep their color more than a striped bean. These ones are black-eyed peas. There's ones that, like on that website I was talking about, they're called soldiers. And I guess if you look at the eye, and they're a larger bean, I believe that they're called tiny soldiers. You can see like an imprint of what looks like a little tiny soldier on the inside. Those are generally, it's Southern cuisine to celebrate the New Year. So black-eyed peas and greens symbolizes money, prosperity in the New Year. Yeah, Papa. We're using our dried white beans today, so this is our white beans that we're using. And if you looked at the soaked white beans from yesterday, the soaked white beans from yesterday, you'll see that they tripled in size. Remember, so I put in about this much beans and covered them to here. They absorb all that water, and you need to be careful about how much beans and soaking that you're going to be putting in your refrigerator or your walking, because what happens is they start to swell up, absorb all that water, and get larger and larger. So if it starts here, it's going to end up here, and if you're not careful, it'll end up all over your walking. So you need to be careful there. So we'll get into some of these lentils. This is kind of like a split pea, but it's called dal. It's a white bean, a split white bean, or hasn't been polished. It's a type of lentil. But a traditional lentil, so let's start with the more interesting varietal. These are called the beluga lentil. And these are fantastic. I brought these in to do, in addition, the thing that I like about them is that they hold their shape when cooking. So they're great for salads or, something where you really want to see the definition of the lentil. One thing that I found is that, if I put something in there like onions or celery or other, it dyes everything black along with it. But they are to resemble beluga caviar. A little bit more expensive. The other one that we have is our Hawaii lentils, or our green lentils. And these ones are beautiful. Like when they're wet, they look like tortoiseshell. They're really beautiful. Lentils also hold their shape really nicely. Like those. And then we have our common brown lentil. And these ones will slightly hold their shape, but they will tend to break apart. They're flatter and wider.
Like the color.
They tend to fall apart. And if I go, these ones, these are local, and these are also local. One is a local green, and one is a local brown organic lentil. These are red lentils. So basically, red lentils are not meant to hold their shape. They'll actually fall apart, break apart, and become almost like a puree. These are used quite often in Indian cuisine, Middle Eastern cuisine as a soup or a dal, or a base of different types of purees. And basically that particular one has had its husk and outside endosperm removed. So that's just basically, or not endosperm, the brand, removed from it. So it's been curled, and so it's not meant to hold its shape. And the last but not least on this one, so I was in Utah, and my husband loves lima beans. He's one of those guys, and for some reason I don't understand it because I don't mind them at all. You know, people have such an aversion to lima beans. I'm not sure what that is, but I mean, they're just a creamier bean. They just, you know, it's I think it's mental.
Or if they're cooked wrong, like overboiled and then served.
Exactly. So, but he loves them. Oh my God! Like I could, you know, if I put him, you know, by himself or you know whatever, he'd probably just eat like you know peanut butter sandwiches and lentils or lima beans. That would be the man's diet. I was traveling through Utah and I found this little co-op and they had these. They're called Christmas lima beans, and these Christmas lima beans. Can I just tell you, they're beautiful, but they require such a long soaking and cooking period. It's amazing. They take quite a long time to fully gelatinize. They're delicious, but I'm not kidding you. It took me like probably at least 6 hours to cook those bad boys to get it to fully get creamy and delicious and luxurious. But they were good. They were definitely good.
Oh yeah.
So those are just some of the fun beans, and that's just like, you know, only a little sampling of some of the varietals that you can play around with. I'm going to get in, I'm not going to talk about soybeans. How many of you have ever grown like these are beans, or even in kindergarten where you got a little Dixie cup and got that little sprout? So basically what it is like these two carpels, right? They're two carpels that are separated, and they open up and the sprout comes through the middle. And rises up, so the carpels become the nutrient for the actual plant. So the hilum is where the seed is attached, and that's initially where it'll absorb water. And then the seed coat, so the outer seed coat, is the outer layer, the legume seed. And so we used to have this recipe, and we moved back over to the Kitchen Academy, and we had this book, and it was this recipe for baked beans, and I'll go into it after I talk a little bit about it, but it calls for things like bacon and molasses, and tomato and brown sugar and salt and you know all these delicious things, right? Well, all these things affect the way beans absorb liquid. So it called for soaked beans and then all these other products, and then to bake them, right? So just remember that when we were talking about this. So the colors of the legumes are determined by the seed coat, and so they're washed out. We're not going to talk about that. So mature legumes are starchy and require long cooking to soften cell walls and granules. Whole dry beans obviously take a little longer. And then the hilum initially, and then the rest of the water, the liquid as it's cooking, goes to the seed coat. So cooking them, fresh shell beans take longer, just enough water. So you always want to simmer. You don't want to boil beans because the turbulence will break apart the outside of the beans, and they'll disintegrate. So acid. The addition of acid, tomato, will slow down the breakdown of cell walls, slowing the softening process. Sugar helps reinforce the cell wall, making it stronger. So the structure slows down the swelling of the starch granules. Calcium reinforces cell wall. Pectins and salt slows the absorption rate. So let's go back to that black eyed or the baked beans. So acid, tomato product, sugar, molasses and brown sugar, salt, bacon, and salt. But these beans had no chance, right? So how would you make this dish. So I have soaked white beans. I have brown sugar, molasses, bacon, tomato. How would you make this?
Wouldn't you cook your beans mostly and then add everything?
You would cook your beans first, plain, nothing else, and then add the flavorful ingredients, and then you would bake the beans. Right, exactly. So speeding it up, soaking, obviously pre-soaking them ahead of time, going from, so it, you know, again, if you see the beans that are in there as opposed to what the dried steak looks like, they're obviously 3 times absorb the liquid. Alkali. So do you remember when we did the
powder,
different, you know, the acid, the salt, and the baking soda? Do you remember what happened to our cabbage and our beans? It disintegrated, right? Same thing happens if you add a little baking soda to your. It helps speed up the process, but it also has an output of like a sulfuric compound that is not delicious when eating beans. As far as you know, it has a slimy texture. Have any of you ever had natto? Oh, it's soybeans that have been soaked and then been cooked with this. They've been with alkaline, and it has this like slime. Honestly, like it's disgusting. It's absolutely. And I thank you for that because it is absolutely disgusting. And salt in the soaking water will speed up the absorption rate, but it has a more mealy texture as opposed to a creamy texture. And we're not going to talk about this. We'll make this downstairs and all this fun stuff. If you are interested in fresh tofu and things like that, or watching the process, there's a place in Bellevue, right in Factoria, called Tofu 101, and you can actually watch them making fresh tofu, and the tofu that they have there, the fresh soy milk. Oh my gosh, it's just amazing. Tempeh natto. Here's that natto. It's just nasty. Why do beans make you fart?
I like the sight.
Anybody have any kind of idea why? No? They're indigestible carbohydrates. So indigestible carbohydrates, meaning that our bodies can't break down, or you know, they start to break down earlier, and they in this part of our gut here. So by the time they get down to this part of our gut, they have a sudden increase of bacterial activity that happens right after ingestion, and because we can't digest some of those carbohydrates, that's what creates it. There is, you know, obviously our natural beanos, right? I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but what they're called scientifically, but things like fennel, cumin, you know, there's like you look at the addition of epazote and all these things that like in Mexican beans or in cooking beans, you'll see natural things that are added to, you know, clove, like we have bay and things like that, which acts like a natural beano in our systems to be able to help us digest beans. But because they have such high bacterial, you know, activity, they break down so quickly. Is another reason why they cause us to get sick if we don't have them at the proper temperature, kept at the proper temperature. So my husband scuba dives, and I don't. I snorkel around and I get scared and go back in the boat. But we were out, we were in Mexico, he was diving a wreck, and so it was like this long day, and they provide lunch for you on this like tour, and you have the choice. You can have kind of the American lunch, and which was like, I don't know, like a cheese sandwich and an apple, and you know, maybe a bag of chips, I think it was. Or the Mexican lunch, which was this cook had made these beans, and he left them just sitting in this pan. You can have that, and there were some tortillas and some other things that you can add to it. But literally, I mean, the chef in me was like, "Oh hell no!" They were left at this like room temperature. You can eat them as you wanted, but they weren't heated, right? And so I don't know when they were made. And my son goes to get. I'm like, no, cheese sandwich, you know, because if you've ever gotten really, you know, food poisoning sick. But for me, that's not pretty. That is not pretty at all. So making sure that they are at proper temperature and that you're cooling them down properly is also key. Spreading them out into a shallow pan and getting them right into the, you know, the walk-in. So we're unable to break down the carbohydrates into absorbable sugars on our own. All right? for everyone. Yay! All right, let's mix